So, morning everybody. How was it reading that speech this morning? You read a speech in the morning. Was that good? I read it through also, so I thought it was... I mean, what sort of world are we looking forward to? I think it's a world where we meet each other, in a higher place, in a sense than we're at now, all of us, regardless of what race or nationality or religion we come from, we need to meet each other. And we haven't been meeting each other somehow, so we need to elevate to a higher place. But I don't think that'll mean that everybody, will lose our differences. In a sense, we always retain our differences. Every single individual is unique. But we need to elevate our heart within our culture, within our tradition, and so on, and bring out the very best. So I just reading through that speech this morning, I felt this is a very beautiful, simple way of applying this insight that Father Moon has about our relationship with God into terms which we can all really relate to about children and parents. It's a very touching approach. So, this part, as David implied, and as we mentioned in the introduction, is looking at, if you use the analogy, we're looking at the cause of the sickness. Why is it that everything is not as it ought to be? Why is it, although there isn't a design fault, and God conceived out of his heart, out of his longing to give, out of his irrepressible impulse to give love to an object, to a partner, to someone to live for. And God made a beautiful, beautiful plan of, what would that object be? What would the universe be? Put into it his own nature and own being so that everything would be harmonized as it is within God. And yet actually life is not full of harmony, peace, happiness. It's not like that. So how come? If it isn't a design fault, how does it happen? How did it arise? And that would be enormously important to comprehend, because only if you can understand how and why it went wrong, can you of course begin to resolve it. Also, very importantly, we would need to address this issue. Is it a design fault? If it isn't a design fault, how does it happen? God doesn't want it. God didn't plan it. If the design isn't wrong, how does it go wrong? It's a very critical issue. In libraries, of theology, there's shelves and shelves and shelves of books about pondering over these issues. How come if God is good, the world isn't as it ought to be? Anyhow, this was, I don't think I showed this yesterday, but this was actually one of the last slides from yesterday. I didn't show it in the end. It's a summary of those three blessings, which in the biblical language are referred to as be fruitful, multiply, have dominion. But of course we understood that this is to do with bringing together those dual characteristics, bringing mind and body together correctly. What does that mean? It means centering on true love, centering on heart, actually, which is the ultimate, source. So in a sense, the love of God passes. Where does the love of God pass to? In one sense, of course, the love of God is coming to the body as well as the mind, but actually, because the mind can comprehend and relate to God, the mind needs to be objective to God and then connect to God as its subject, become one with God, and then direct the body. And then the body responds to the mind. So the mind's a good object to God, its subject. The mind itself becomes a good subject. It means a source of love and guidance for the body. And of course this grows over time, because that's the order in a sense, God, mind, body. But in another sense, God cannot just come down to the mind, because God is the dual characteristics of internal character and external form harmonized. So actually, more completely in a sense, God comes down to this place. God comes down to the place where the mind and body meet in a life that's in accordance with love, that's connected to the motivation of heart. My heart within my mind, but that's completely at one with the motivation in the heart of God. So this is resembling God. God is the harmonization of internal character and external form, centering on heart. So this person's mind and heart and physical body and action unite in this place. So, where do we become one with God? Yes, in a sense, we become one with God in our mind, but in another more complete sense, we become one with God where mind and body meet in a life which expresses love of God, and consequently love of others, love of things. So God finds his temple. We didn't look at this so much, but actually in the principal book it explains that the dwelling place of God is actually inside the human being, where mind and body meet in this way. And then the vertical love of God manifests itself in the loving life of the person whose mind and body is meeting. This invisible causative force manifests itself visibly in the conduct of the human being. So we're supposed to be, living substantiations of the love of God in this world. This is what the human being is supposed to be. So we know that one, but then we take this one, and then actually it becomes the foundation for the next one, right? Because you need this maturity here and this maturity there for the next meeting to take place. So in one sense, of course, the principle explains masculine is the subjective role. So God, in a sense, the natural role is that man should take the initiative in this relationship, in a sense, and that expresses itself physically through the male structure. So man sows the seed, and the seed fertilizes the egg. This type of content. It's an external expression, but external expression is to do with internal character. But this should be understood correctly as well. Remember, we talked about, yes, in a sense, man is subject, but actually, wife has to be subject to three objects. Do you remember this content? So don't understand it simplistically. But actually, where does God come down on the earth so that his love not just resides within the individual or passes from the individual to others through loving actions, but where can God, through love, create life? Where does life get created? It doesn't get created here. My life, yes, but not reproduction, not the multiplication of life. The multiplication of life takes place here. So, God's passes love, and then love passes and give and take action occurs. But more specifically, the love of God finds the container to hold it and pass it to the next generation in this place, right? And then, of course, that moves on. You've got a good family, society, nation, world springing from a lineage, a tradition of love that doesn't only have life in one generation, but becomes a tradition of love that passes down through the generations. So what's the most important inheritance you can give to your kids? Well, it's the 6 million Swiss francs you've got in your account, right? There's nothing better than that. No. More precious than all the money in the whole wide world is lineage. It means a tradition of love that you pass so that they know what love is because they tasted it in the family, and then they have it to pass to their children, to their children, to their children, to their children. This is more precious than anything in the whole wide world. So that becomes the foundation for the next blessing, which is where people lead their lives properly conducting themselves towards ownership, possession, power, authority, using it not to exploit and misuse other people for my own intentions, my own selfish purposes, but really as an expansion of loving other people, an expansion of loving beyond the family into the wider world, and using things in a way that's really pleasing to God. So this is in place of God, because human beings are to represent God, or we explain human beings can establish this oneness with God because they're made in the image of God, and then they take the position of God towards all the rest of the creation that God made, because the rest of the creation is a symbol, not an image, right? So it's at a distance from God. So what does connect it to God? How can God taste it, touch it, experience it in a way that it cannot directly? It's actually through human beings. But of those three blessings, I really want to emphasize this. It's very clear where the central point resides and what's the determining point of everything. Whether this ideal of God comes down on earth or not, the central determining point is this place. Of the three blessings, this is the central one. And in this blessing, this is the central place. Because although, do you remember when we described about the four loves? Children's love, brothers and sisters' love, conjugal love, parents' love. Parental love is more complete, right? It's the most complete love. It contains all the others. The others build towards parental love. But, although parental love is more complete, which is the most decisive love? Which decides whether God's ideal becomes substantial or not? It's not parental love. It's conjugal love. If men and women don't meet in the right way, then there's no love to create life and to create lineage. So of the four loves, the most critical is conjugal. So the principle is very clear what lies, where the most critical final element of human responsibility resides. So Father Moon's saying something which in the current trend in our world is very, very extraordinary. He's saying the most important thing is absolute sexual ethics. It's not a mantra that's on everybody's message today in the modern world. People are very, not so thoughtful about that, actually. But of course, it's rooted in all the great traditions. Sexual ethics is very deeply rooted in the great traditions. But we're losing our sense of why it's important. But the principle is very clear about why it's important. Why am I emphasizing this so much? Because we're going to look at the fall of man. I don't think there's anybody here who didn't hear the principle's explanation already. I think you all heard the explanation already. So you know that the principle's understanding is the fall of man occurs in terms of making relationships in a way which is completely disconnected from God. And that can be done in all sorts of different relationships. Myself and things, myself and that man over there, or whatever it is. But the most critical place, because the most decisive of all relationships is the man-woman meeting in love relationship. So in other words, if that place is taken by another motivation, the whole thing is undermined more powerfully than in undermining any other relationship or bringing the wrong motivation to any other conduct. It's central. It's the most central. So, in other words, you already know from the principles of creation, you already know what you have to defend most to realize the world that God intended. And similarly, we understand through the principle, when you take that place, God lost it all. How can God lose it all? How can God lose it all? For goodness sake, how's that possible? God is the all-powerful, all-knowing, creator of everything. How can God lose it all? Because God made himself vulnerable through creating. Do you understand? So if you say to somebody, I love you, and I devote my life to you, and I will spend the rest of my life for your sake, what are you doing? You're making yourself vulnerable. Do you understand? But if you don't do it, I don't want to have anything to do with anybody. So, what happens to people in this world? We get hurt, we get disappointed. Keep my distance. Never give my heart because you might break it. Then, yes, of course, you defend yourself, but actually you also never experience anything. So, there's all sorts of songs and literature about this. Do you give your heart? Don't you give your heart? Because this is so dangerous to give your heart. But this is a requirement of love. If you don't give your heart, you never taste it. You can't taste it. So God, in creating, God made himself vulnerable. Why? Because he created something which doesn't have to do what the plan is it should do. And that is the human being. Why the human being? Because human beings are not automatons. They're not robotic. They're not pre-programmed. It's not automatic. The response in the end is a response of love. It's born of love. It can't be because you have to. You know, I've got the machine gun. You will love me. You know, you will kneel down and worship me. You know, that is not it's not what God is looking for. So you know, it's a dimension of love. When you create in that way, you make yourself vulnerable, because the other side has maybe little to do in compared with what you've set up. But whether they do it or not, you know, so maybe we shouldn't have any children, because then we're not going to be disappointed, are we? You know. So you catch this. So this is very important sort of starting understanding, which comes from the principles of creation. So we're going to get into this whole thing. How did everything go wrong? Why so much conflict? Why are we so torn in terms of a contradiction within ourselves? We want to behave a certain way, we find ourselves behaving another way. Romans 7, St. Paul, I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is in my flesh. I can will what is right, but I cannot do it. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. Wow, I mean, is that relevant or not relevant? I mean, it sounds so strange. Why don't you do what you want to do? But you look at the world, you know, who would not put their hand up for peace? Who would not put their hand up for love? Who would not put their hand up for, you know, who doesn't want to find that man, that woman they'll spend all eternity with, who will always love them? Who would prefer not to? You know, there's nobody. You know, when whoever it is, Elizabeth Taylor's marrying for the 8th time, you know, well, you know, this is going to last a couple of months and it'll all be over. You know, even believing that these things will still be what in our heart and soul we long for. So why don't we make it? Why doesn't it last? You know, what's the matter with it all? Why is our deepest desire not turning into reality? Why can't we make it so? You know, it's a huge question. If everything God created was good, where does Satan and evil come from? Which, you know, the great religious traditions talk about, you know, evil, talk about a source of evil, give it different names, but fundamentally they talk about this. Why is God's purpose of creation not fulfilled? Why is the world of the 3 blessings, you know, the joy for God and humanity, why isn't it realized? If God is good and almighty and knows what is going on, why does God allow people to suffer? All these huge questions are there. So, you know, did God make a mistake? It comes down to that in a sense. But anyhow, one thing's clear, and that is we are in this conflictual situation. We do not find ourselves easily doing what in our heart of hearts we know to be good all the time. We have a struggle to do good. So that's, as I said, if you go into the mosque, if you go into the temple, if you go into the church, and you ask everybody who is without fault, without sin, without contradiction, please put your hand up, not a lot of hands will go up. And in a sense, the most unlikely people to put their hands up are who? Who's most unlikely to put their hand up to that question? Do you think? If, you know, I tell you, if there is a saint in the room, they're the least likely to put their hand up. Why would that be? Because they're, you know, Mother Teresa's sitting there, right? All the saints put your hands up. Mother Teresa, maybe not. Why not? Humble, yeah, but also she's very aware of what is, you know, someone who, excuse me, but you know, we think sometimes, I'm a parent, right? And sometimes, you know, your children go through a period of immaturity, and you know, they think they know everything, and they know it all, but actually, you know, they don't. And Of course, you want to see it all work out, but they don't know it all yet. So, I have one of my children, he's very confident. He can judge everything and everybody and decide what's right and what's wrong, and he's got it all taped, goes to work and the management's not right because of this, that, and the other, and he knows how to do it all better, but actually, I hope, I really hope that will become true, but I'm totally confident it isn't yet. It doesn't really know. So the more you deeply comprehend, the more you know what the standard is to become really true. It's not simple. So surely Mother Teresa didn't think she was enough. I guarantee it, even though she was in the gutter, picking up the people crawling with vermin and being eaten alive on the street. And as she did it, she felt, this is the body of Christ. So I don't mind. It's my act of love. So, amazing, amazing. But actually it's very difficult to be like that. So, it's difficult to get up in the morning. It's difficult to, make a commitment to a person and stick to it. It's difficult, you said, if she says something nasty to me, I will keep my mouth shut. I will not say anything. But it's very difficult to do it. So, this is reality. Because we're in this contradictory situation. So the example I use, if you have something which is supposed to have a particular purpose, but it acts against its purpose, then this thing hasn't got value. So if you've got a camera that's supposed to take pictures, it doesn't take pictures. I usually use the vacuum cleaner analogy. So you've got a vacuum cleaner supposed to suck, right? You go around the house, you suck up all the junk off the floor, and that's great. You've done it all over the house, you go into the best room in the house and you turn the vacuum cleaner on in that room, and instead of sucking, it blows, right? Does the opposite of what it's supposed to, and all the dirt in the vacuum cleaner blows out all over the room. This is a problematic vacuum cleaner, right? It's supposed to suck, but it blows. So you take it back to the shop and you get it repaired and everything's fine. You take it back to your house, go around the house, vacuum everything up. It's really good, get into that room again, the final room, the best room in the house, and it blows again. So, this is, in the end, what you do, you have to throw it away, right? Because you don't know what it's going to do. Is it going to suck or is it going to blow? So that's vacuum cleaners, right? But what about people? So dad is supposed to love children, right? Mum is supposed to love children. Children love parents, Dad and mum love each other. They're all supposed to do these things. But where are the most painful things happening in life and in the world? They're happening between dad and mum and parents and children. That's where they're happening. Good things happen too, but the most painful stuff also happens in that place. So murder, violence, all these things happening in those places. And they made promises to each other and they even meant it, but they couldn't keep it. I'll be faithful to you all my life. And then, there's the other woman. There's the other circumstance, You had all my children, but you don't look so beautiful anymore, so there's the secretary at work, and she's kind to me, and, There's all these sorts of things. So people have their best intentions, but they don't keep them. So this is not other people, this is everybody, and this is me and you, and it's undermining. It means we do what we don't want to do, and we don't do what we want to do. So how are we going to understand about this? So the principle says there is huge value in Scripture. There's huge value in the deep teachings in the scriptural traditions. So the principle looks at the biblical story, which is also fundamentally the Quranic story, and we've got some Quranic quotes at the very end, about Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden. I remember when I first went to the lecture about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And actually, I brought up in a Christian background, but, I wasn't thinking, let me study Adam and Eve and I will solve all the problems of the world. I was thinking probably this is, just some sort of fable, mythology, whatever it is. I'm not going to get anything useful out of that stuff. If you literally believe it, what are you going to do? If you literally believe the Garden of Eden story, what's the way to solve the world's difficulties? What would be the first thing you would do? What do you reckon? You take the story literally absolutely true, right? So what's the problem? What must you not do? Eat fruit, right. Eat fruit, that's it, no more fruit. Don't eat it. Actually, better than not eating it, what's better than not eating it? I mean, don't eat it is good, but just to avoid any possibilities, cut them all down, right? Burn them all, destroy all the fruit trees. Human problems ended, right? And just in case of anything else, what else would you do? According to the literal story.
No snake.
No snakes, right. All the snakes, chop them in bits, destroy them. No snakes, no fruits, no problems. Finished, right? But nobody's doing that. I mean, maybe there were some crazy people. I heard there was somebody in Korea that thought the fall was caused by a peach, and then they cut down all the peach trees and burnt them. This literally happened, somebody. But generally speaking, even the most literal fundamentalist, believers are not doing that, because they know that actually it doesn't provide the answer. So why are we going to look at this? Because actually there are very profound answers involved, but you will not get to them by just looking at it literally. It's much more profound than that. And a lot of scriptural teaching and scriptural writing is not easily understood, because it's put in this sort of poetic language, it's put in this sort of allegorical language, it's put in this language that uses one thing to represent another thing, and so on. So we're going to look specifically at this particular scriptural account and try to understand it more deeply. So those of us who are familiar with the principle, and there are a number of us here who have had a lifelong connection to it, and we know what it says, this is not necessarily, when you listen to it, the most exciting thing, because you already know all the answers, right? So when you're going to the detective story, then it's quite exciting, because suddenly you find out in the end that the criminal, we have this game in England called Cluedo. It's who committed the murder, and was it Captain Scarlet, or no, it's not Captain Scarlet, is it? It's somebody else. But you've got all these different characters in the story, and which one did the murder, and you're trying to find out. So in a sense, we lost the mystery of that when we're familiar with the principle, but we have to understand what deeply meaningful answers is it providing for us? Where is it pointing to the critical problem? And that critical problem people are not aware of, right? Who is it in today's world, particularly the modern, developed, educated world, whose focus is sexual morality in terms of solving global problems? Which government is trying to mobilize forces to increase chastity and fidelity? Churches and mosques and temples did that work, and to some degree they still do, but even they're losing their authority. They're losing their authority. Why are they losing their authority? Is it because people don't want to be married to someone they love all their life? Don't they want that anymore? Do they want to change partners every 3 weeks or 6 months or 10 years? Or is that the great plan for our children, to be happy? Oh, wouldn't it much better they have 16 fathers instead of just one, because there's all these other guys around who don't even know which one sowed the seed. Is that the ideal circumstance? But that's the direction that, the educated, wealthy world is moving in. And we don't even think there's anything wrong with it. We think it's liberation. But it's so no one is emphasizing this point. But there's a total, absolute, unbelievable blindness to reality. And if you work with kids who are messed up, you know what lies behind it. It's people who can't sustain loving relationships, who end up having children, and they can't provide that, security and embrace of love. Because, you want to know your origin, you want to know your home. What's your home? Your home is where your dad and your mum met in love. And that should be the place that God came down. And that should, that's where you came from. You came from the love of God. And you are beloved. And that, knowing that origin, that's really important. So, we're going to look at that. So I'm going to go quite quickly through this content, because I hope you're all familiar with it. So basically, this is the Garden of Eden story. 2 trees, at the center of the garden, 2 human beings, first man, first woman, snake, serpent. Commandment from God: You can eat anything, but don't eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If you do, you will die. And here's the story. In the Garden of Eden, they were both naked and they felt no shame. The woman said to the serpent, God said, you must not eat the fruit from the tree, and you must not touch it, or you will die. You will not surely die, the serpent said to the woman. She took some and she ate it. She also gave some to the man, and he ate it. So they made coverings for themselves. So 2 trees at the center of the garden, tree of life, tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's the one that bears the fruit. So the principal's answer to what these trees represent is very straightforward. It says the tree of life represents Adam, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which bears the fruit, represents Eve. Both at the center of the garden. It goes through an explanation about how in the Bible there are many occasions when a vine or a tree is used to represent a human being. So Jesus said, I am the vine, you are my branches. As long as you're connected to me, then, or I am the true olive tree, and you're the false olive trees, and you have to get a graft from me to become true. Or in Jeremiah, the man who trusts in God will be like a tree planted by the water. Many, many, many things. After the fall of man, in the biblical story, it says Adam and Eve were blocked from reaching to the tree of life because there was an angel with a flaming sword that blocked the way. And in the last book in the New Testament, in Revelation, it says, finally, those who wash their robes white, those who cleanse themselves, they will have their access to the tree of life restored. And also in Proverbs it mentions, hope deferred makes the heart sick. If you can't meet your hopes, if you can't realize your hopes, you feel sick. But a desire fulfilled is a tree of life. So the implication is the tree of life is that most desirable thing. The principle, so these are those quotes again, which we just went through. And so the principle is very clear. What is the desire of the human being? When we say the desire is the tree of life, in a sense it means human perfection, human maturity. So when you're little, what do you want to be? When you're 6, what are you waiting for? You're waiting to be 7. You're waiting for your 7th birthday, right? And you get the little badge with the 7 on. And you're not 6 anymore, you're 7. And then you're waiting to be 8, and so on and so on and so on and so on. And then you're waiting to be 21, and then you're waiting to, earn your first, euros or whatever it is. You're waiting for those marks in life that indicate you're growing, right? And you're hoping for something great. You're hoping to become the best musician, the prime minister, the number 1 surgeon, the whatever it is. You're wanting those things. So the principle explains that the hope is maturity, fulfillment, completing myself, fulfilling myself. And it in this instant, it relating, of course, not that women don't seek to fulfill themselves, of course they do. But in this instance, it's referring to man. Why? Because there's another tree. What's the other tree? The other tree is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This is the fruit-bearing tree. 2 trees beside each other, tree of life, tree of knowledge of good and evil, bears the fruit. Clearly, this is a representation of woman. The tree of knowledge of good and evil is only expressed in that Genesis, Adam and Eve story, part of the Bible. It's not expressed any other time. But it's clear what it is. It's a representation of woman. Then we've got the serpent. What about the serpent? The serpent spoke to Eve. Well, anyhow, that's already a little bit indicative that it isn't really a snake. It's this serpent is able to communicate with human beings. This serpent is aware that God gave a direction and actually manipulates the situation to undermine that direction and to try and persuade Eve she doesn't need to keep that direction. But actually, if she does taste the fruit, that actually her life will be fulfilled through tasting it, not through not tasting it. And also, one other thing is clear. Whatever this being is, because God is good and only makes good, and only makes everything that God made, nothing was made by mistake or carelessly. Everything was made purposefully. Everything has a part to play. And when everything in the creation of God works correctly, nothing is left out. Nothing is ignored. Nothing is going to end up being feeling I was cheated. I didn't get what I should have got. Everything will be. Same with, parents and children. Of course, what you want is this child to be happy and you don't care about the other ones. Or these three to be happy and the other one, well, don't like them very much. That's not the original way of things. So God had a plan through which everything would be fulfilled. And everything's good. But then how did something evil arise? Well, that's a very big question. Anyhow, in the Bible, the principle points to some biblical content which identifies and speaks specifically to this. This is from the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament. How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the dawn? How are you cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low? You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. Above the stars of God, I will set my throne on high. I will make myself like the Most High. So who is this Lucifer? This is an angel. Here we go, another quotation from Revelation. And that great dragon, serpent in other words, was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He and his angels were thrown down with him. Again, generally speaking in today's world, in public, in the major matters, people are not focusing on angels so much. There are people who have a sense for spiritual things. Just my colleague Jack Corley just rang me this morning. He's going to Ireland to have a meeting, the Women's Federation holding a meeting, and attending that meeting is a very interesting lady in Ireland who, when she goes and speaks in the Roman Catholic churches, they have to close the doors because they can't get anybody else in. And she has experiences with angels. And people are interested. But generally speaking, David Cameron isn't getting up in the Parliament saying, I think we need a bit more angelic support to resolve all these financial difficulties. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting that, economics should rely on angelic forces without any concept of economical laws, economic laws. But anyhow, actually what I'm saying is people's awareness of the spiritual reality is extremely limited. And they're not aware of that dimension in resolving things. So, in the, what's his name again? Anyhow, the person who's responsible, Robinson, the guy who's responsible in Northern Ireland at the moment, he just gave this speech about changing the schooling situation in Ireland so that actually Catholics and Protestants go to school together. And he's aware, and somehow we have to make it different. 95% of the children go to a Protestant school or a Catholic school. They don't mix. And then they've still got all the walls, and there's still a lot of tension. So he knows that's not, but is he aware of the spiritual dimension? Is he aware of all those people? Because when they still got painted on the walls, William of Orange, when was William of Orange? 1689, 1690s, there he was in Ireland, Protestant cause, all these things. They're still absolutely impacted by that history. Why are they impacted by history? Because in the spiritual world, there's all those people who, had their heads chopped off, their arms chopped off, they were mutilated, on both sides. They're all there, It wasn't a pretty way to go. So it's all there. It's all operational. So these things are very real. So Father Moon is not someone who's, just experiencing the spirit world all the time, It's very practical, but in his practicality, he's conscious. Your physical body lives in a physical world, right? This is it, we know. This is the physical world. We know all about it. But actually you have a spiritual nature. Where does that exist? It exists in the spiritual world. You're not so conscious of it, but actually it's there. And then your spirit is influencing, we're influencing each other. So how is it? You sing the song in the morning, and I don't know, I just sang those two songs with you, and then I feel the spiritual atmosphere. Don't you feel the spiritual atmosphere? Everybody's smiling, and there's something's happening. This is not, this is something that's going on because there's a certain dynamic, we're attracting a certain spiritual atmosphere, which means that we're attracting also higher spiritual influences. That's happening in every place of sincere worship. In every place where people are living in a good way, if you go into the company of good people, you're not just in the company of good people in this world, you're in company of good thoughts, good feelings, good influences. It's completely different. So this dimension, generally speaking, people are not so aware of, but it's extraordinarily influential. So anyhow, God created only good. So how can Satan exist? Obviously not. Evil is not created by God. Did not exist together with God from the time of creation. Everything in the universe is harmonious except for human society. So what's gone wrong? Well, anyhow, we identify the serpent. The serpent is this archangel, not just an angel, but a leading angel, Lucifer. So there are spiritual beings. And angels are spiritual beings who have spiritual reality. They have spiritual bodies. It means in the spiritual world, they're not puffs of smoke, They have a form. They have a form, and how would you see that form? Basically, it's the same as, angels and human beings, in one sense, not so different. The main difference is we have physical bodies, as well as we're in the spiritual and the physical world. Angels are in the spiritual world. They don't exist in the physical world. But in other senses, they're very similar. So you look at biblical accounts, you look at Quranic accounts of people encountering angels, and many times they mistake them for human beings. Of course, there's this, anyhow, I better not get too into that. I'm already behind time, probably. What crime did the archangel commit? And the angels who did not keep their proper positions, he has kept them, he meaning God, has kept them in darkness, bound with everlasting chains. In a similar way, Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding towns gave themselves up to sexual immorality and perversion. They serve as an example of those who suffer the punishment of eternal fire. So it's likening the angels who did not keep their proper positions to the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. What was Sodom and Gomorrah, these cities mentioned in the biblical account, famous for? They were famous for sexual immorality and perversion. Consequently, Lot and his family were asked to leave Sodom and Gomorrah. And, they left. Lot's wife looked back and pillars. This is the biblical account. So they're famous for being a place where there was no order of love. So people didn't understand an order of love. They were pleasing themselves in whatever way they wished without any concern for what it would make. And they were actually therefore violating something that's very precious, because the whole point of the principle is this place where man and woman meet in love, this is holy, holy, holy. There's no place more holy than the place love becomes life and creates lineage. There's nothing more precious to God. So how do you treat the most precious thing? So here is the £5 million diamond. Okay, so you go out the room and you get to the dining room and the tea machine. Where's the diamond? What have I done with the diamond? You give something you labored on for a long, long time to somebody, and they leave it in the station, in the waiting room, in whatever it is. Is that the way to treat precious things? No, valuable, precious things you treat very, very, very carefully. We're not talking about monetary value, do you understand? We're talking about the things that will determine happiness or no happiness. So those things you have to treat them very preciously. So, of course, I tell this story also about my children. I usually mistakenly end up identifying one of them, but anyhow, one of my children was quite young. I don't remember exactly how old, and he went off for a summer camp type thing. And of course, sometimes the bedrooms are not great, but anyhow, you try and get them to tidy up themselves. You don't want to intervene, but when they're away, sometimes you go in and you do a bit, because you want to help. And my wife went in, tidied up the bedroom, going through all the drawers, and my wife's very thorough. Drawers under the bed, bedding's there, but at the back of it, all these bottles and sweet wrappers and ice cream wrappers, because he'd gone to the cupboard. My wife is very good at shopping, so she buys a lot of things when it's cheap and puts it in the cupboard, and then he took some of them and ate them in the bedroom and hid them behind the... So we found this, and then, of course, But and then although you feel a bit upset, then in the end you laugh because, it's only sweets and, it's not the end of the world, But of course it's not ideal either. So of course when he came back we explained to him, but we weren't deeply disturbed, But if you go into the drawers under the bed when he's a bit older and you find the knives and the guns or the whatever else it is, the drugs or the hypodermics or whatever it is, then you might get a little bit more disturbed, you understand? Because then he's killing himself. Or maybe you might be disturbed if you find the Durex, if you find the contraceptives or whatever it is, because he's not committed himself to anybody. And yet he's maybe doing stuff with other people that, not showing them respect, not understanding the value, and you'd be very worried about it, right? So, in other words, the more you get from sweets to knives to guns to, to careless about other people, the more this pattern of not keeping the right code of conduct becomes more and more serious. All right, okay. So the point is, what's the most serious thing of all? What's the most holy thing of all? In the end, it is to do with the sexual relationship. So we know what crime the angels committed because that's the evidence, like in Sodom and Gomorrah. What crime did Adam and Eve commit? After their crime, they were ashamed of their sexual parts and they made aprons from fig leaves. Because it says in the Bible they were naked and felt no shame. But after they ate the fruit, they became ashamed of their nakedness. They sewed together fig leaves and they covered the sexual areas of their bodies. So in a sense, the message is just plain, it's just clear, If you eat fruit, then you hide your hands or you wipe your mouth or whatever it is. So the crime of Adam and Eve also was to do with their sexual relationship. So also there's this other aspect coming in. Is the fruit a fruit? Well, why would God put a fruit that could be so destructive in such an obvious, tempting place? And why would that fruit be so desirable that you would risk your life for it? These sorts of questions the principle also raises. It gives quotes from Jesus. Here we go. What goes into a man's mouth does not make him unclean, but what comes out of his mouth. In other words, what you do, not what you eat. So the fruit, according to the principle, is not fruit. The fruit is a symbol. It's a symbol of sexual love. So sexual love is potentially the source of life and lineage and the core of human happiness. But if you mistreat it, of course, it's incredibly damaging. Trees reproduce by their fruit. People have children through their sexual love. To know someone in the biblical sense, if you look at the Bible, they use this expression, so-and-so knew so-and-so, man knew a woman, and then children were born. To know is to have a sexual relationship. Many times also in the past, in the poetic language, sexual relations are referred to eating a fruit or plucking something or this type of expression. Or even this expression, to know good and bad, tree of the knowledge of good and evil, was a euphemism, a linguistic, poetic type of language referring to promiscuity. In other words, something that should be good but is used carelessly and irresponsibly and can become very damaging. Very interesting from the book of Proverbs. This is the way of the adulteress. She eats and she wipes her mouth and she says, I have done no wrong. So a very, very specific type of reference to the same type of symbolic language. So just to take you back then to the point I already emphasized, so I don't have to emphasize it so much again. This is, of the four loves, the most complete is parental love. But of the four loves, the most decisive is conjugal love. Do man and woman meet in the place the love of God comes down, finds a container that can hold it all, and passes it to the next generation. Love turns into life and turns into lineage. So that's why this is the most sacred place to protect and defend, and it's the most damaging place if you use it carelessly. So what's the Genesis story talking about then? It's expressing not that the serpent came to Eve and asked her to eat a piece of fruit. No, this is the angel Lucifer came to Eve and seduced her into a sexual relationship. So that's actually what's going on. So God gave a commandment, we'll look at that more in a minute as well, to Adam and Eve not to eat the fruit. What does it mean? It means not to have sexual relations. So why did God create men and women with sexual natures and sexual organs if they're not supposed to have sexual relationships? I mean, that's very strange. The commandment is clearly not a commandment forever. It's a commandment during immaturity. So why do we seek to dissuade teenage pregnancy? Why do we not think it's a great idea when 12-year-old boys father children with 11-year-old girls? Why do we think it's not a great idea? Anyhow, I mean, the answers are clear in a sense, because they don't have the capacity to take responsibility for that. It's going to destroy their whole lives because they'll miss all their education, they'll miss their childhood. It doesn't work. So the commandment is not a forever commandment. The commandment is a commandment for when you've attained your maturity, with God's permission, you can engage in that relationship. Also, it's very clear who Eve should be having the sexual relationship with. She should have the sexual relationship with Adam. That's the partner. So obviously Lucifer is not the correct partner. So, and also you're aware, of course, that Lucifer is an angel. So how can an angel and a human being have sexual relationship? Well, Eve has a physical mind and body, and she has a spiritual mind and body. And Lucifer has a spiritual mind and body. And this is substantial. In the spirit world, this is solid stuff in the spiritual world, in the spiritual dimensions. Absolutely, they can have a sexual encounter with another, spirit body to spirit body. So that's what the principle's implying. And then, of course, what happens is, according to the story, Eve then passed the fruit to Adam. So then on the foundation of that relationship, then Eve has a relationship with Adam. And of course, the influence that lies behind her when she has the relationship with Adam is from the other. So here we go then. So we know we have this period of growing and then we should attain spiritual perfection. So that's the point then. Adam and Eve shouldn't engage in that relationship until they've fulfilled the first blessing. That means until they've got their mind and body together to the level that their heart has developed to be, to resemble the heart of God. And then on the foundation of that, then they can actually engage in that relationship with one another. So the commandment not to eat is applicable, it applies, it's relevant during that growing period. But once they've attained that maturity, then of course they should have that relationship with one another, and through that relationship they fulfill the second blessing. And therefore they're free to eat, but free to eat acting out of the right heart and motivation with the person that is their eternal partner. So when the fall took place, it meant that the relation took place not here, but actually here, during the period of development, prior to their full development, and not in a way that was connected or permitted by or blessed by God, and with a very sort of different type of heart and motivation. So remember, the number one thing to secure that give and take action is going to make the proper result is it connected to the right heart and motivation? The person's heart and motivation should be at one with God's heart and motivation. And that means they're doing it for the sake of God, for a higher purpose, and for the sake of the other person and everybody else. So, Adam and Eve had this relationship during the period when they should not have eaten. So this is the core of the fulfillment of God's world. This is the second blessing. And from that comes true life and true lineage. But instead, the point is that place of love was substantiated, not connected to the heart of God, not as an act of love for God and an act of love for one another, but it was connected to the sort of heart and motivation that Lucifer had when he seduced Eve. And then that same quality affected her relationship with Adam and his relationship with her. In other words, it was all motivated centering on myself. It was for myself, thoughtless of God, thoughtless of the consequences, irresponsibly for myself. And we know very clearly that when even you establish something which could make something good, but if your motivation is completely wrong, it will never make something good. Evidence that the original sin was illicit sexual love. Well, if you look at all the great traditions, they're very, very clear about this topic. As I said, still, in the modern world, many people are progressing from the medieval, antiquated views of their religions and liberating themselves, supposedly. But actually what they're doing is they're creating huge problems of the human heart, problems between husbands and wives, parents and children, huge social problems, a huge difficulty. Religions are very clear as well about processes to try and recover right heart and right attitude, and as it were to make, and again you are familiar with this idea a little bit, I think, how to make conditions of indemnity, how to restore what's been lost. So the pledge of celibacy, even though men and women are created as sexual beings by God, deeply religious people promise to God they will not engage in any sexual relations. In a sense, it's unnatural. What's that all about? It's because they recognize that they're cut off from God and they want to concentrate on building the relationship with God. So, nuns, bride of God. Monks, devoting their life to God. This type of high spiritual path. What a strange thing, for Jewish people, this rite of circumcision. Of course, also that affects the Islamic community as well. So why circumcision? Why cut the male sexual organ? What's that to do with? Why do that? Why not, cut your finger? Why not put a, why not wear some certain clothes? What's that got to do with? What's that all about? And of course, very clear recognition in all the great religions about the seriousness of adultery, because it's more profound than even murder in a sense, because it's to do with, you look at this realistically. If you deal with sexual abuse, if you deal with the sexual abuse of children, if you